Hospital Porter's pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV. And welcome to this UFO Disclosure 2020. Well, I last did one of these in July, which was just before World Disclosure Day. Yeah, I did, didn't I? I did, the last one was the 2nd of July, and World Disclosure Day, of course, was the 8th of July, and hope you all had a good one. In fact, I think most of you did, because I did a live stream. Do you remember? I did a live stream. It was a record-breaking 4 hours, 5 minutes and 55 seconds. Yeah, but it's funny, you know, that this subject comes up again. It's now the year of clearest vision, but no sign of disclosure yet, and well, it's a very unusual year for various reasons that I've talked about before, and I no doubt will go into again. But a lot's happened still in the world of ufology and exopolitics. For example, there was a report soon after I did the last video of a possible UFO scrape in Devon. Now, I immediately went over to look at this, thinking, oh, it could be something really significant, like the Nottinghamshire Roswell, like the Pentuck incident, something like that. But it turned out, well, there was a video, a little video. It was a very short video, barely over 10 seconds. And it was some bloke. It was a man in a wood. He speaks with a strong West Country accent. He goes, look at this here. There's all these trees are falling down, and whoa, I reckon this is aliens. This is. Ooh. It wasn't actually. I mean, it's unlikely. There's a clearing in the woods. Some of the trees are bent over as if something with major mechanical force has come down in that area. But no sign of burning. No sign of radiation effects. Anything could really cause that kind of damage in a wood. We don't know for certain. And also, I can't help wondering if this is some kind of publicity stunt. And the reason I think that is because the guy who made the video, the guy who made this particular video, is called Ben Landricum, and he's actually been in the papers before. He's been in the papers before because he got in a bit of trouble. You see, because he's a photographer, and he went out into Plymouth Sound and he photographed some people surfing. Now, he put these in the newspapers, and apparently the surfers don't like that because, well, the areas around the West Country where there's good surfing conditions are quite rare, and so when a group of surfers finds it, they tend to keep it to themselves, because if too many people turn up to surf in the wrong place, there's not enough room. They end up crashing into each other. And so they attacked him, they sabotaged his car, and they vandalised his car, and they wrote the words "surf snitch" in paint on the bonnet. Now, surf snitch is what they call these people who do things like that. But the thing is, he took advantage of it, Landricum. He and his wife Maria immediately brought out a merchandise line called Surf Snitch, where you get baseball caps, t-shirts, coffee mugs, things like that. So they got the Surf Snitch branding now. So I can't help wondering if this is Mr. Landricum's way of drawing attention to himself again, possibly. The same cannot be said for what happened a little bit later. It was revealed that something extraordinary. You know about ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program? Well, as we know, it ran from 2007 to 2012, and then it closed. Well, guess what? It's just been revealed. Oh no, it didn't really. This is unbelievable. The New York Times, right? They said we're going to release another article, another UFO article. Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal have been writing it, and it's going to be big. It's going to be big, and there was like a big build-up to it. I was thinking, wow, what's this going to be? You know, and it turned out, oh yeah, by the way, it didn't shut down. Now technically it did, but really on paper only, because what happened was the ATIP actually was closed at the Defence Intelligence Agency, the DIA, which was running it before. This is where Harry Reid and that got involved with it, and it was transferred to the Office of Naval Intelligence. So it was moved, and it was given a new name. It was called the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, UAPTF, and no doubt those letters will become part of the classic lexicon of ufology, along with, you know, UAP, UFO, all these other little things like that. But basically, when it moved from the DIA to the ONI, really everything moved with it. All their office furniture and everything else just was shifted into a new office. All the personnel stayed with it, things like that. Elizondo, I don't know what he did. I'm not sure, but so the UAPTF was born. Well, it was reborn like a phoenix from the ashes of ATIP. So much to the point, I think it's dishonest to say that ATIP closed in 2012. It's misleading because it's just like. It's penny pinching, really. It didn't close, it changed its name and moved to a new location. That's all it did. When did the UAPTF close then, Ben, I hear you ask? Well, guess what? It hasn't. You heard me right. This is unbelievable. I mean, this is just incredible. I mean, I never expected anything this big when I heard that the New York Times was planning a new article. I was expecting like a few more frames of gun camera footage, maybe some telemetry and things like that was released. I didn't expect anything this big. But the UAPTF is an active program currently at the Office of Naval Intelligence. It reports directly to the Senate Intelligence Committee, and which is you may have seen interviews with Marco Rubio, who is a former presidential candidate. He actually went up against Trump in 2016. Well, all is forgiven. If he speaks openly about this, all is forgiven. That's all I can say. This is what's even more. This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. The UAPTF is going to issue public, unclassified reports twice a year. You heard me correctly. This is by far the most open UFO project, state-run, that the world has ever seen. And I mean, this is not to say that the UAPTF will not also handle classified operations. I'm sure it will. But the fact that it's making a public report, what? It's really quite. So it's just monumental that this has happened. And I know all the shill heads are going to gather around saying, "No, Ben, it's a psyop. It's a psyop. It's a shill. It's a shill. Everyone's a shill." You know, things like I know that. I'm expecting that, but I don't have to run through the reasons why I don't agree with that again. You know, I think this is significant. It's but what's even more amazing is that there's been some interviews with Marco Rubio and with Reid, Senator Harry Reid, and with Luis Elizondo, and even President Trump, which I talked about in the last video or the one before, where all of those men have dropped very significant hints that there's far, far more that is waiting in the wings. And indeed, the New York Times followed up on this. What I mean by that is even decisive physical evidence. All those, they didn't actually say it. I mean, they were evasive in various. All those guys, all four of those men, were evasive in different ways. But all four of them, as if they even came to an agreement to do so, gave out a very subtle and distinct message that there is basically decisive physical evidence. And what do I mean by decisive physical evidence? Well, decisive physical evidence would be like Roswell being real, or the various other equivalents of Roswell around the world. Because as you know, I believe Roswell is just one of many such incidents involving something comes to grief on the Earth's surface that is not made in this world by the hand of man, and that it's secretly salvaged by the government and suppressed. That's happened numerous times around the world. It may be up to 100 times, I think, possibly in the last century. Roswell wasn't the first, by the way. There were many others. There were many others before Roswell. The earliest I can come up with is actually, there was one from the late 19th century that I've heard of. In fact, two. There was one in Texas, USA in 1897, and one, I believe, in Germany much earlier. So this is for this to come clean, for them to even suggest something like this might be real. I mean, there's none of this. Oh, you can neither confirm or deny. Mick Pope, saucer in a hangar, saucer in a hangar. No, this was far more equivocal. So you've got to ask yourself why they're doing that. And of course, the shill heads will go, "Oh, it's disinfo, Ben. It's disinfo." Okay, well, what's it disinforming for? What purpose does this disinfo serve? Yeah, and this carried on, of course, with the second New York Times article that came out a week later. And in a way, the second article was even more interesting than the first. Got plenty of dragon juice. I think this is going to be a long video. The second New York Times article was is one of these office tour articles where they give you like backgrounds behind the stories. I mean, so it wasn't a story by Blumenthal and Kane. It was a kind of how these came about, how this story came about. So it said this: it's not about belief. It's about the vigilant search for facts. Now, that's an interesting way of putting it. It's not about belief, it's about the vigilant search for facts. Because I got the feeling when I read this that the authors were well aware that the giggle factor is still there. That is the fact that you have a kind of 70 years of propaganda, official ridicule and denial. That's the words I'm looking for. This official ridicule and denial that has been the hallmark of the way the mainstream media portrays the UFO phenomenon from 1947 all the way to 2017. 70 whole years can't be undone overnight. So the Times is well aware of this, and but they present. So what they do is they kind of justify what they're doing by covering this subject, and they justify it in a refreshingly non-apologetic way. They're very assertive. And they're very sort of like self-possessed. They don't sort of say, oh, well, we don't really want to go into this. They say, this is the vigilant search for facts. This is where the evidence has led us. We've made an effort to remain scientific and rational here. And this is where basically it's gone. We published these articles by Blumenthal and Kane because we found we subjected it to the normal standards of our journalistic integrity, and we found it to be effective, to be real. That's the thing. Now, what's really even weirder is that they talk about hints. Now, they talk about they basically report on what Elizondo, Reid, and Rubio was saying. Now, this is before Trump came out and did his thing. Now, he did that interview with Tucker Carlson. They didn't mention that, but they did mention that I was a bit late coming into this game because I was preparing for my talk at Newcastle, and so I didn't really get onto this until a couple of weeks after it happened. But this suggestion of crash retrievals, of course, if in a sense maybe it's the crash retrieval which I think is the epitome of big D disclosure, isn't it? I mean, that is the absolute disclosure moment, really. I mean, if you want people off to say, well, isn't what we have now disclosure with ATIP? No, it's not. As has often been said, really. Well, I'll come to that in a minute because Richard Dolan and Bryce Zabel do have a debate, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself here. But really, I think that if they ever come forward and say, Roswell was real, or one of the Roswells was real, that is essentially big D disclosure, because they're saying, well, we have decisive physical evidence. And the thing is that this article hints at that. That's the thing. It drops hints again, and it goes back to what it said about Rubio, Reid, Elizondo, and Trump. It doesn't mention Trump, like I said, but it does mention the others. So why is that? Now, they do mention reported physical evidence, that is, reported UFO material. This could be something as small as a small fragment, like the type that Bob Bigelow was studying with ATIP. He was involved with ATIP. Or it could be something much larger. It could be like a hull, a piece of a UFO, a flying saucer hull, or an entire intact UFO hull. I don't know. But of course the skeptics will jump on the phrase reported, won't they? They'll say report. Yes, it's only reported. They'll say it's only reported. Well, it could be report. If it's reported, then it probably is not true. It's just saying reported, not confirmed. Yes, technically that's true. However, let's look at it this way. Like if your little kid runs in from the garden on Christmas Eve night and says, "Mummy, Daddy, I just saw Santa Claus flying over. I heard the sleigh bells, and he said, ho ho ho, coming from the sky." That is a reported Santa Claus sighting. So my question for the skeptics is this: how come there's not a multi-million-dollar budget government agency involved in looking into this reported Santa Claus sighting? My point is that the government, and this is not just in this occasion, going right back to the Project Signing Grudge, they have gone to enormous efforts, enormous efforts, and spent a lot of money and gone to great inconvenience to investigate UFOs. At the same time, laughing at them and denying they existed. Now, this paradoxical behaviour from the part of the state has become transparently unsustainable. It's not possible now to maintain this pretense anymore. So the skeptics who say, yes, but they're only talking about reported crash retrievals, that's the kind of line you could dish out maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You can't dish it out now. It doesn't work anymore. You're living in the past, guys. All I can say is that the search for facts has been very vigilant, obviously, and the government have been leading this vigilant search for facts. And what's more, in this article, the New York Times hinted. They do a lot of hinting here, don't they? And indeed, I'll come on to that because there was a bit of a tussle between Dolan and Zabel later on. They hinted that they have more. They have reports in progress that are currently being penned by their journalists. When these will be released, I don't know. I mean, I hope it'll be part of Trump's October surprise, if that's what he's got up his sleeve. He's going to need something like that, certainly. But they do say we have more information coming, and what's more, we have sources on the inside. We have government agents who are covertly passing us information. So this would be like the early ATIP situation before the confirmation by the Department of Defense. It's a very interesting, very interesting article indeed. By the way, if you want to know more, what I'm talking about in this film I have discussed on the Panmo Voice blog. I don't know how many of you read it, but most of what's in this program I have dealt with on the Panmo Voice blog. Excuse me a moment. Just going to adjust the lighting. Come on. I know. Open Facebook, and if Facebook is open, the screensaver doesn't kick in. That's it. So, as I said, the computer monitor, which is just over there, assists me with the lighting. Now, there was an interesting video released by Zohar Stargate. Now, you may be familiar with Zohar Stargate because I've mentioned it before. The reason is because some of their videos, I mean, none of their current videos, unfortunately, but some of their previous videos had a script that was written by me. I actually penned 6 altogether. They produced 5 of them. Now, the thing about the Zohar Entertainment Group is kind of like our Netflix, and it's one of many. There's others like Gaia TV and these others, which is really great. It's really great there are media companies now specifically geared to the sort of loony fringe, so to speak. And the problem is they don't keep their videos up for long. They keep them up for a few months, then they delete them, which is a shame. So the videos that I actually wrote the scripts to, are no longer on the channel. I mean, it's possible they've been bootlegged elsewhere. I haven't found them. If I did, I wouldn't link to them probably unless it was officially part of those, because copyright and things like that. But still, I'm proud of what I did. Now they've released another one. It wasn't written by me, but it was all about the Nimitz encounters. That is, with the Tic Tac footage, the gimbal, and the go fast. Now, what's good about this particular video is I can't remember the full title of it, but it's on the Zohar Stargate channel, or is it Matrix? It's Zohar Stargate Matrix Wisdom. It's one of those channels. If you just Google Zohar Entertainment Group, you'll find the right channel. It's got a rare on-screen appearance by Steve Mera. Now, Steve Mera is a good old mate of mine, actually. He tends to work more behind the scenes these days rather than sort of put himself in front of cameras and things. He's more kind of a private researcher. Yeah, he presents this particular video, and it's very interesting, actually. He talks about these things. Now, what we're seeing, he says, what are we seeing here with these UFOs that the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier group discovered? Now, this is like nothing. People have been asking the obvious question that used to be academic when people were just laughing at it. Now that people are seriously asking in greater numbers than ever before, what on earth or off it are these damn things? Now, the obvious answer is that they are artifacts of an extraterrestrial civilization. But what if they're not? What if they are actually made by the hand of man? Maybe they are aircraft, experimental aircraft and spacecraft created by humans, either state operators or private companies. That's the question. Now, because we say this isn't, there's nothing, the capabilities, about the five signatures of ufology, the acceleration and the levitation, things like that. We don't have anything, there's nothing that we make that has those capabilities. You see how easily they outmaneuver these FA-18 Hornets, these fighter jets that the US Navy has. How easily they evaded them. They say, well, we don't have any technology like that, but it'd be more accurate to say we don't have any technology that we know of that has been publicly acknowledged that has that capability. That would be a more accurate statement. It would be a more accurate statement. So could we be looking at technology that we do have, humans do have, but it's just been kept quiet? It's either American or possibly it's foreign, Chinese, Russian, or some other country, or, as I said, maybe a private organisation. Now, this idea, this is an idea that's been explored by many ufologists. It's not terribly original, actually. In fact, it dates right back to 1942, when the first reports were issued relating to what became known as Foo Fighters, because, as you're familiar, these are World War II encounters where the RAF was on bombing runs, and they were accompanied by these strange balls of light. And of course, the question, there was a report issued in 1942 about the various pilots who discovered these things. There was even some footage, actually, of these luminosities accompanying the plane, and the government was seriously worried about them. They called them Foo Fighters. They didn't actually say that they thought these might be extraterrestrial, but they did say that it was possibly some kind of new German super weapon. Hitler had something up his sleeve, and he was using it against the RAF. Well, if he was using it against the RAF, it didn't do much good, because there's no reported cases of RAF bombers or their escorts being attacked by these objects. No aircraft were actually downed by these aircraft. Were shot down. No British aircraft was shot down by a Foo Fighter that we know of, or disabled in any way. And you'd think that it would be the time to play your Joker if Hitler had some super weapon. It turns out that actually Hitler did have super weapons, which he was developing. Now, he actually succeeded, but only towards the end of the war, and a lot of it was sequestered under Operation Paperclip. You know the story, the bell, the beehive, things like that. Now, this wasn't a part of that. There was nothing to do with that. You'd think, though, that if you were Hitler and you had these kinds of weapons, wouldn't the time to play that Joker be when basically the Royal Air Force and its allies were destroying Germany from the air with massive aerial bombardments, incendiaries and things like that? Wouldn't that be the time? Wouldn't that be the time to use your key card, play your key card, and just shoot these aircraft out of the sky before they had a chance to completely eliminate German cities in firestorms? The fact they didn't do that indicates that this has nothing to do with Hitler. It begs the question as well, if they had that kind of technology in 1942, well, they've kept it classified for an awfully long time, haven't they? And that's an important point. But anyway, Steve does bring some interesting observations to bear on the Nimitz footage. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the Tic Tac footage, it has these 4 dog-leg-like appendages. They're called legs, but there's no evidence to suggest these are like legs or landing skids or anything like that at the time. They're just like some protrusions that turn at a right angle. Now, you see these on planes, and if you look at an aircraft, you often see, I don't know if it's every aircraft, or many of them, you see that kind of structure. It's called a pitot tube, and its purpose is to bring air into the aircraft when it's moving by the ram effect to measure the aircraft's airspeed. And Steve was wondering if that's maybe something similar. Now, so what's also interesting, I mean, I don't have time to go into this in detail, but there are patents available that have been published showing aircraft of a similar description. Now this goes right back to the work done at Skoda. Yes, don't laugh at those cars anymore, because they helped develop anti-gravity aircraft in 1945 that was then classified. But there are blueprints available, and since then there have been others which show what look like anti-gravity aircraft. I mean, there's official reports that have been released about the TR-3B, for example. And is it possible? What this means is, has what the TTSA revealed actually been some kind of an elaborate series of drills in which the US Navy was pitted against America's own secret technology, or against foreign technology, which is of this nature, this secret space program like technology? Now, I think, having looked into it, I think this is unlikely for several reasons. Not because of the capabilities, but because of other factors, such as, for example, when it comes to exercises, the US Navy is perfectly capable of conducting its own exercises. And it's true that the Nimitz and its fellow ships had just been through a massive overhaul in 2004. They had brand new electronics fitted and things like that. But they're perfectly capable of conducting their own drills and exercises. They're constantly doing research and development missions. There's no need essentially for anything else on top of that. If there was, I mean, if this was some kind of drill in which the Navy was secretly set up against its own secret technology, that in itself, if it was American technology and this was all arranged, it was all staged, then that in itself requires fantastic explanation. And such explanation has not been forthcoming. Which leads it's far more likely that these are actually not, this is not American technology. Is it foreign? Well, again, you've got to ask yourself, why would say something from China or Russia, why would it fly so close or within the area of the Nimitz battle group and its detection systems and its aircraft so ostentatiously? What would probably have happened if this was some kind of reconnaissance mission by the Chinese or the Russians? The most likely thing they would do is send in a very high-flying aircraft or a submarine or a satellite, or they'd use a satellite, something which could not be detected. And there's an important factor here as well. This is an important question. Did the Nimitz battle group at the time these encounters happened have a live fire capability? Because if they did, exercises like that can go very badly wrong. Someone could get killed. If the decision is made to open fire, all kinds of things could go wrong. Now, you know, the Milton Torres incident, things like that. I mean, these things, luckily no one was hurt in that situation, but they don't stage events with forces that have a live fire capability. This incidentally is why Sasha Christie's time and motion theory for the Rendlesham Forest incident cannot be true. It cannot be true. And of course, how long, if this is all secret, how long has it been secret for? Because what is described by the pilots who, with the ATIP and the TTSA footage and things like that, is actually it's no different to what's been described by other people. I interviewed Nick Redfern recently for the Hapanwo show on Hapanwo Radio, and he talked about his dad. His dad was a radar mechanic, and you know, it's in the RAF, and they were based at a base in the east of England, and they were picking things up over the North Sea, and it's remarkably similar. This was in the 50s, and it's so similar. What Fravor and the other pilots have described has been described by pilots of previous generations many times. Difference is they had no evidence to back it up. People like Milton Torres, people like Parvesh Jafari, they came forward, they approached ufologists and they explained what they saw. Now we have video footage. That's the only difference. So if this is some kind of secret undercover government technology, they've kept it secret since at least the World War II, and while keeping it secret, they still occasionally fly it over people's heads just to keep them on their toes. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, for example, I mean, there are things developed in secret. For example, a good example is the U-2 spy plane, which was developed in the 1950s. It was kept completely and utterly quiet. Nobody knew a thing about it until one was shot down over the Soviet Union, and the pilot, Gary Powers, was paraded in front of cameras. Eventually they managed to get him out. There's a good film called Bridge of Spies which talks about the secret negotiations to get Gary Powers free. But it was a spy swap sort of thing. But there's other examples, for instance the F-117 Nighthawk fighter, the so-called stealth fighter. Now that was developed all through the 1970s, and it was kept quiet until 1988 when it was declassified, and it was shortly after it became very famous because it was used in the 1991 Gulf War. Now I noticed this chap. I mean, I'm going to interview him at some point for a Hapanwo show. I won't name him here, but he's a guy who knows a lot about planes. He used to be in the RAF, and he told me he wondered why, if you look at the head-up display in the gun camera footage, you see the word slave, and he said that is pilot's parlance for a drone. Now, someone else, when I brought this up last time, someone else contacted me on a Telegram group, someone who'd also been a military pilot, and said that no, that's not what it means. I mean, I honestly, I don't know what's what here. I really don't. But there's all kinds of different ideas about what all this means. Now, I should point out something that seems to have emerged a lot in the recent years since 2017. Now, you've always had your skeptics, you've always had your UFO skeptics, you've always had your Philip classes and your Donald Menzels and your Dr. David Clarks and Andy Roberts. But there seems to be a new breed of UFO skeptic who actually, rather than hanging out with their fellow skeptics, they tend to get involved with the ufological world. They're the kind of ufologists who say, yeah, I think 0.001% of UFOs are alien and all the rest are not. Those kind of people. And I have to say, they seem to have got this idea into their head that disbelieving in extraterrestrials, regardless of how much evidence points towards it being an extraterrestrial explanation, is something very prestigious. And I'm afraid to say I see a lot of mutual backslapping going on. There's this guy I've encountered. He's not an unpleasant chap, but he's one of these people. I must stress that Steve Mera is not. I don't classify Steve Mera as one of this ilk, this little clique. But there's a chap I know on a Facebook group who fits this description perfectly. Because when I brought up this subject on the group, he said, they're not alien, they're ours. Get over it, man. Get over it. Now, get over it is you say. Get over it is what you say to a child who still believes in unicorns or something. Okay, if you say get over it, right, to somebody who's presenting a calm, rational, logical case and is a fellow adult, I do ask myself what really motivates these people. Get over it, man. Get over it. Come on. Because it seems to be that it's like it's rather like the MBA phenomenon in psychic research. The Materialist Bravery War that I've made. I've made several comedy videos about this as well as some serious ones, and I think the anti-David Icke brigade in the truth movement. You know, it's like they've, it's like, oh, all of you, all the rest of you are gullible. But, you know, I'm superior to you. Yeah, I'm this not. I've started calling the people, people like this guy in the group. I'm going to call them they're not aliens posers. I think that's the equivalent. So I've got my MBAers, I've got my anti-David Icke brigade. You know, I did this video, is it cool to be anti-Icke? And now I've got like the they're not aliens posers. You know, they really do have a kind of like very disdainful. They seem to have they seem to express a lot of disdain for people who disagree with them. I mean, if you sort of say, well, actually, maybe these are aliens, and here's why, they say, oh, you're just a wide-eyed believer, whereas I can face the truth. It's not an argument. The people who do that really bug me, because it's their only motivation for doing it is to lording it over you. It's essentially using other people to throw your own pragmatism into sharper relief, and that's just so juvenile. It's incredible. Oh dear. Anyway, there's this video that Richard Dolan made, and I always watch his channel, it's bloody good, where he suggests that basically the disclosure train has ground to a halt, which was really amazing, which is really strange, because I just done a video and done some articles where I say, look, this has really got momentum, and you get people like UFO Jesus, you know, the post-disclosure world, saying this, you know, being very, very enthusiastic. And Richard Dolan comes on and says, oh, because he said that since 2017 he's rethought the entire disclosure thing, because he thought that, as I did, I mean, I said this myself, that really you couldn't really undo the truth embargo without massive social upheaval of all kinds. There'd be some kind of catastrophic collapse of society. There'd be enormous chaos in all areas: science, religion, economy, etc., etc. But he then, since 2017, he's said, and I've had reason to think that he's right, that it's possible that the pre-disclosure world could be peacefully and systematically dismantled. I mean, obviously that's what I prefer. I don't want chaos and lots of aggravation, you know, like the kind portrayed. You know the disclosure scene in my book, Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, available at all good bookshops now, and it's 2 sequels, priced £10. Yeah. So I'll be plugging someone else's book in a minute. Obviously that's how it's portrayed in my particular book, and that's how I always thought it would be. But it's possible, you know, that. Come on, I've got it on Facebook. What's the problem? That maybe this can simply be calmly and very, very gently and methodically changed. So we move into the post-disclosure world almost seamlessly. I think it's hard to say, because obviously the big secrets have yet to come out. What's been admitted by the government so far is really not an awful lot more than was admitted in 1969 at the end of Project Blue Book, during the investigation then. It's the old Condon Committee. So Richard Dolan thinks that the whole disclosure train is ground to a halt. He thinks what's happened is, he admits, yes, the truth embargo has lost ground, but it's regrouped and it's fallen back. It's fallen back and regrouped, and it's not going to go any further for the time being. He says he sees no way it's really now stuck where it is for a long time, in this fallback position, which is, yes, we know there are strange things out there. Yes, we have evidence and we published it. We've, you know, including video and stuff like that. But this is the big but. We don't know what they are. They could be this, they could be that. We don't know they're aliens. We've got no decisive physical evidence of aliens or any other kind of evidence of aliens. And Richard Dolan says it's going to just stay there. That's where it's going to stay. And he's made the same point that I've made, actually, that this seems to have entered, this revelation seems to have burst out without the big ripple that I thought it would. I mean, where are all the questions? What about Roswell? What about the Rendlesham Forest incident? What about the Phoenix Lights? Why is this not the front page? You'd think this would upstage and page 2 even the coronavirus. You know, or maybe you know maybe the coronavirus is all about keeping that from happening. I don't know. I mean, there's all kinds of things you could say about the COVID-19 pandemic and what it serves. I mean, it's been like a kind of 9/11, hasn't it? In fact, it's been even more of a transformational, a catastrophic and catalysing event than 9/11. So he says basically he thinks we've hit a ceiling now. It doesn't mean there's not going to be a disclosure, but it's not going to come as a part of the process that's currently underway since 2017. Now, Bryce, after he did this video, he did an interview with Bryce Zabel, just celebrating 10 years of AD after disclosure, their book, their seminal book about exopolitics. And Zabel disagrees. Bryce Zabel disagrees. He said that what we're seeing now is not an ending to the process, it's just a pause. And he brings his considerable experience in journalism and the media to bear, because he was with CNN for a long time and things like that. He says that they're just currently having meetings in editors' offices at the moment. As I said, you know, the New York Times articles and things like that, they're just currently thinking about how we're going to go further with this. As I said earlier, you know, the New York Times has admitted it has reports in progress, it has works in progress about UFOs. And Zabel says, look, don't worry, they're just thinking, how do we put this out in the right way, and well, also in a lucrative way. I mean, they want to earn a living off this. Obviously publishers want to earn a living, and that includes newspaper publishers. You know, they think there may be some negotiations going on with Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal about how maybe they can poach these people to other networks. I mean, Leslie Kean was actually interviewed on a radio show where she said something like this. She said something about that, actually. Zabel thinks that, you know, there's been a bit of a lull, and see, there was a lull. Remember, to be 2018. This whole thing seemed to stop in 2018. Do you remember? The whole of 2018 was basically, I thought, well, where's this going? And I thought, this is just gone under the rug, hasn't it? It's been put back under the rug. But then 2019, it all broke out again. Remember, all this new material came out. Then there was the reports about how they were real and stuff like that, and then the Department of Defense declassified them, etc., etc. So this could just be another lull. And I do sometimes wonder, actually, if maybe we ufologists are getting greedy, and we're not really. Maybe we're expecting too much. We're expecting miracles. I mean, I think I'd say the same for a lot of the anti-Trump brigade in the truth movement, who say, well, you know, he hasn't done this, he hasn't done that. I mean, I've covered this in other stories. We expect too much. We gain something, and then we expect more immediately, and we become greedy. We're not looking back and admiring the ground we've already covered. I mean, Bryce Zabel does think the aggregated movement is still forward. I mean, he said, you know, I mean, I was quite surprised when I found this out, but it's true. The TTSA board have been retweeting his blog articles. They've been retweeting them all, and this includes, so Elizondo even retweeted an article by Bryce Zabel, including from Zabel's blog. I can't remember what it's called, but I do follow it. Where the one where he says Roswell was definitely an alien spacecraft that crashed. You couldn't put it more blatantly than that, and Elizondo retweeted it to all his followers, which includes Rubio, Reid, and all these other guys. Wouldn't be surprised if Trump himself would have read that. I think if you ever think to yourself, well, you know, why is it all slowed down? Why is everything stopped? Well, just imagine, go back to before 2017, before December 2017, and say to someone, I've just come from the future. You know, what's going to happen in the next few years is that some just really incredible film footage, gun camera footage from aircraft is going to come to light. It's going to be very detailed and obvious of what it is, and what's more, the government are going to admit it's real, and the pilots are going to go public and everything like that. What would you say as a pre-2017 ufologist? You'd say, no way, that's too good to be true. But it is true, it's happened. So let's not give up on this. You know, let's not despair just because it appears that it's reached a point where you wonder where it's going to go. We don't know what these new articles coming from the New York Times are. We don't know what they are. I mean, we don't know when we're going to see them. I mean, obviously, I hope that they'll be before the election. There'll be Trump's October surprise to support Trump. I mean, Steve Bassett, I don't know what he thinks about it. He may be thinking, oh, they're waiting until November when Trump's gone, or something like that. I don't know. But we'll find out. We'll find out, and maybe this is just when we think there's another. It's all ground to halt. Suddenly it will start up again. I don't know the future. We don't know the future. We don't know what's going to happen. But all we know is now. And we can project into the future what things that might be. But by taking an active role in that, we can make the future what we want it to be. And obviously I hope Bryce Zabel is right and Richard Dolan is wrong. That's what I hope. Now, I know Paul Armstrong is watching. Paul Armstrong loves to... He showed me this book once. He said he got this. He showed me a link to a book. It's called The Roswell Conspiracy by Boyd Morrison, and I read it, and because I think Paul what he wanted to do, because he likes to take the mickey in a non-malicious way. So I tolerate him. I even humour him sometimes because I don't detect any malice in his jokes, in his jibes. But he said, "Oh look, someone's written a book about Roswell already, Ben. You were too late. They got in there first. They got in there first with this extra-political fiction." Well, I found out actually this book by Boyd Morrison. It's actually quite a good book, but it's nothing like my own. It's nothing like the Roswell trilogy. Totally different in every way. But I've come across another book, which is much more like the Roswell trilogy. It still has significant differences, and it's this one. Quite a big book actually. Let me just lift it up. Oh, it's just the Atlas Shrugged of ufology. There we go. It's called Not Alone by Craig A. Falconer. And there's the back. You see the back there, you see. It's very interesting. It says, aliens exist, the government knows, and Dan McCarthy just found the proof. When Dan McCarthy stumbled upon a folder containing evidence of the conspiracy to end all conspiracies, a top-level alien cover-up, he leaks the files without a second thought. That's what I would do, I'm sure. The incredible truth revealed by Dan's leak immediately captures the public's imagination. But Dan's relentless commitment to exposing the cover-up and forcing disclosure quickly earns him some enemies in very high places. For his whole life, Dan McCarthy has searched for a reason to believe. Now that he finally has one, he might soon wish he didn't. It's actually a pretty good book. It's actually not as it's not quite as big as it looks, because you can see it has quite a thick gutter there. You see there. So it's actually it's slightly smaller than it looks, but it's a big. It's interesting, you know, because there's this idea of the collective unconscious, the Jungian collective unconscious. I've talked about the 100th monkey and things like that. And in fact, this happens in fiction. Different writers come up with the same ideas at the same time. And now, this is a serious matter to look into this, if there is some kind of collective unconscious, because this is actually, this was published in December of 2015, just 7 months before Roswell Rising, which means Craig A. Falconer and myself were both working on our books at the same time. And this is crazy. I mean, there's been a lot of false plagiarism cases that have emerged out of these synchronicities. I mean, Jane Dorner, who's a publisher and author's coach, she called it something morphic in the air. It's like authors pick up on something in the air and they come out, supposedly coincidentally come out with the same ideas at the same time, or the same kinds of things at the same time. So that, I think, it's a very, what we have here is a very interesting case of that, where Faulkner and myself have come up with the same idea, even though we've had no contact at all, and I never even heard of the bloke until a few months ago. He's actually a Scottish writer, and this is set in the United States, but he's a Scottish writer. It's about a guy called Dan McCarthy, who you've heard about, who's very similar to me. He's crazy about conspiracies and UFOs and things like that, and going on about aliens. And he's a follower of this guy called Billy Kendrick, who's a kind of Dr. Stephen Greer, Steve Bassett and Richard Dolan all rolled into one, with a dash of Graham Hancock. And he literally, there is an accidental leak. He just simply stumbles across decisive evidence that there's been an alien cover-up. And, well, what do you do in that situation? What would I do in that situation? Well, I'd probably do what he did. He immediately puts it up on the internet, and it goes viral. And that really leads to disclosure. It's quite funny, because there's some politicians who are not briefed into it. They don't know about the cover-up, and so they help him. They help him spread this news to try and distract people away from their more down-to-earth scandals. And in doing so, they really put their foot in it. They really put their foot in it. It's quite funny. But the plot has numerous twists. Actually, there's a lot of twists and turns, and like you wonder where it's going for a while. But it's really interesting book, really good book. I really enjoyed this, actually. Now, I didn't sit there thinking, oh my god, damn it, this is too much like my own. You know, I'm no longer unique anymore. I didn't think that, because there are still significant differences between Craig A. Faulkner's book and mine. It's very different in style. It's very different in plot. It's very different in theme. And of course, it's, as you can see, it's considerably different in size. Although this, of course, is just one part of a trilogy. But you know, believe it or not, this guy's gone on to make a trilogy too. In fact, I think there's even more actually than 3. I'll double check. But that's quite something, isn't it? That's interesting. I mean, it could be a coincidence, or maybe not. Now, what's interesting about this book is is that the idea of the fake alien invasion, the idea that aliens, you know, just information leaks out and the government come up with this idea that, oh, they're hostile, they're evil, so we have to join forces, and you know, that's something that I myself have long speculated might happen, and indeed I'm not the only one, and this comes up in that book, and it comes up in my book as well. But you see, you might like, if you've read Roswell Rising, you might like Not Alone, or vice versa. But as I said, there are significant differences nonetheless. There are significant differences nonetheless. And now we come on to the most recent news story. And in fact, I've decided to title this particular segment of this series on UFO Disclosure on this particular element, and that is Venus. Now, you all know the phrase life on Mars. There's even a TV series called Life on Mars, and the search for extraterrestrial life within the solar system tends to focus on Mars because it's the most Earth-like of planets. It has, like, I know it's very cold there, but it does have water, things like that. It does have oxygen, etc. It's just sort of outside the Goldilocks zone, but it's still in a good place, a good position. However, now Venus is another matter. Now Venus is, funny enough, traditionally Venus was always considered the most likely candidate for extraterrestrial life, possibly because it's very bright in the sky. It's the closest planet to Earth on average. It's obviously, apart from the sun and the moon, it's the brightest natural object in the sky when you see it in the evening and the morning. Even if you've got a good sharp eyes, you can even see with the naked eye its phases, because it has phases like the moon. But of course, we always saw through telescopes it was covered by thick cloud, and there was always this idea dating back for several centuries that beneath that cloud lay some kind of paradise where godlike beings lived and there were splashing fountains and grapes growing off bushes and things like that, and there was some unicorns wandering around eating out of your hand and things like that. But of course, in 1970 everything changed, because Venera 9, the probe, actually managed to land on Venus. And what it discovered is it's the exact opposite. Venus is actually one of the most inhospitable places in the universe. The temperature is over 400 degrees. It's hot enough to melt lead on the surface of Venus. Incredibly hot. The pressure, the atmospheric pressure, the atmosphere is very thick indeed, very dense, and at the surface level it's roughly the equivalent of being 3,000 feet underwater. Very deep indeed, deeper than most submarines. If you went down there, you'd be crushed. And if you stepped out onto Venus unprotected, without like a dive, unless you were in some kind of diving bell, you'd be crushed. And in fact, the Venera probes look like diving bells for that reason. It's also, there's no liquid water. Obviously, it's too hot, but there is liquid. It's sulfuric acid. It's boiling hot sulfuric acid. It rains, it evaporates. The equivalent of the water cycle is sulfuric acid. So yeah, it's very acidic down there indeed. So no one ever thought, well, that's where life's going to be. Now, it's funnily enough, the idea then came about that possibly Venus might still be easier to colonise in terms of astronauts. We'll leave aside the secret space program for now. Okay, let's just pretend there's no secret space program. It might be the easiest planet to colonise. It might be even easier than the Moon, even though it's much further away than the Moon. And that's because the Russians, I mean, in the 80s, the Russians actually put a balloon in the atmosphere of Jupiter, of the atmosphere of Venus, and came back with some interesting results. At a certain level within this very thick atmosphere, you reach a point where there's a kind of internal Goldilocks zone in Venus, which is there's a layer of the atmosphere where it's about 38 degrees centigrade, so it's like a hot day or an average day in a very hot country on Earth. The air pressure is virtually the same as the sea level on Earth, and there's very little radiation because there's plenty of atmosphere above you to protect you from solar radiation, even though Venus is much closer to the Sun than the Earth is. And so someone thought, well, that could be a good place to colonise. Now, of course, there's no, it's in the atmosphere, so basically people could live there, but they'd have to live in giant balloons. But it'd be a pretty good place. It would actually be pretty good because you wouldn't need a spacesuit. You could go out without a spacesuit on, because the pressure is the same as what you're used to anyway. The gravity is pretty much the same as Earth, slightly less, but only very slightly less. You know, radiation levels are low. The only problem is you'd need to have a breathing apparatus, like something to breathe through with a supply of air, probably in a tank you can carry on your back, like divers do, like aqualungs, you know. But that wouldn't be much of a convenience compared to, say, being on the Moon, where you see these, well, maybe not, but you know what I mean. The the pressure suits that astronauts wear when they're in orbit around the Earth and they go on spacewalks. Those wouldn't be necessary. And that makes it a lot safer. You wouldn't have to worry about explosive decompression. The same would go for your habitat. If you have like some kind of on Mars and the Moon, you'd have to have pressurized habitats. And if they spring a leak, then probably everyone will die because the thing will just go boom like a balloon when you pop it. But on Venus that wouldn't happen. If your habitat springs a leak, it'd be always a bit of a convenience. Let's go and fix it. But it would be like fixing a leaky roof. So you wouldn't need to pressurise your habitat. There wouldn't be a massive outflow of your own air or a massive inflow of Venusian atmosphere because the atmosphere is still poisonous. There's also the problem of the acid. Everything would have to be treated with anti-corrosion material, including you when you went out. So you'd have to have some kind of protective equipment of anti-corrosion material. It might just be an umbrella to put up if it rains. Otherwise you'd end up being burnt by the acid. The weird thing is, though, it's been revealed, literally just yesterday, that a chemical called phosphine has been detected by spectrographs in Venus's atmosphere. Now, the scientists who published this paper, they tried to find every explanation they could to explain why this phosphine could be there. Because phosphine is a chemical. It's basically it's one of phosphorus and three of hydrogen, so it's a compound of 4 atoms. It's yeah, pH3 I think is the actual number, and it's something we associate with life. It's one of these life signatures that the SETI people are always looking for. And it's very important for SETI, this sort of thing. It's one of these life signature chemicals, and what's interesting about it is it's found in anaerobic environments, that is non-oxygen environments on Earth, such as swamps. Inside the guts of some animals, like penguins, have a lot of phosphine in their guts. I don't know if it's something to do with fish or something like that. I don't know. Fish have got a lot of phosphorus in it. Maybe it's something to do with that. I don't know. But it's very interesting. I mean, this life must be very unusual. I mean, you can't. As I said, it's not just the heat, it's the acid. I mean, even in an environment like you need some kind of something that's protected from the acid. For example, this guy did a demonstration with sulfuric acid. He put sulfuric acid into a pot of sugar, which sugar is one of the other signatures of life, and it flared up into this horrible black mass. He did this experiment on the news. You literally you would have to be have very different kinds of cells. Now there are life forms on Earth that exist in very acidic environments. For example, there are gut microbes in crocodiles. Now, a crocodile's stomach acid is one of the most corrosive substances in existence. Just touching it can burn you. Yet there are bacteria living in crocodile stomachs, quite happily, symbiotic bacteria. So there are cells that are immune to acid. It's very it's a very odd thing. If there's a sign of life in a place where there shouldn't be life. Now this doesn't mean, I mean, a lot of people, like, when I brought this up, I wrote an article about this on Panama Voice and I posted it, and they said, stop getting excited over a load of microbes, Ben. Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean there's aliens on Venus. It doesn't mean there's Val Valiant Thor in flared denims. Yep, I know that, alright, you know, there may be single cell life. I know that's not something you can really take to your leader, is it? But look, that's not the point. The point is, this is the point, right? Life anywhere in the universe outside the Earth is absolutely explosively important, and it's all to do with statistics. Now there is I've covered this before, I think, on because the SETI. I did an entire video on SETI. Do you remember? I don't know if I'll put a link in the description box to it. I might just put a link in the description to my Venus article, and there's links in there to the SETI stuff. All right. And there's also these articles by these 3 scientists here in Oxford, where they say there's no aliens, there's no extraterrestrials, we're alone in a dead universe. And I take them up on that because I don't think that's the case. But I mean, the theory is that life is extremely unusual. In fact, it's something so unusual it may well only happen maybe once or twice or a few times or certainly on average once within 1 billion or 20 billion light years of each other. Only one life form will evolve within 20 billion light years of each other, because it's the old jumbo jet in the junkyard argument, you know, all the things like DNA and stuff like that, and proteins, and they're so complicated, these building blocks of life. You know, the chances of them assembling, you know, randomly are so small that, well, it's hardly, if it happens at all, it'll only happen very, very rarely. And of course we say, well, it's happened because we're here. Yes, but we're one of the lucky ones. We happen to be on one planet in 20 quadrillion that actually has life on it. So life is either so far away that we'll never find it, or it just doesn't exist, and there's nothing out there, just carbon compounds and noble gases, as Carl Sagan put it. So now I dispute that for reasons that I explain in my SETI video. You know, I bring up the subject of panspermia and, you know, the stuff by Chandra Karama Singh and what he discovered. I bring up, well, UFOs basically. Now the theories, I mean, the people who hold this idea that we're just like a tiny little speck, with this minuscule little oasis of life in a gigantic billion light year cosmic desert. The people who say things like that, if one single solitary amoeba is found which can distinctly be proved did not originate on Earth, whether you find it on Earth or on another planet, that whole argument falls apart, because then the burden of, if they want to hold on to it, and I know some of these bastards will continue with it, but the burden of proof is on them to explain how two different life originated in 2 different places so close to each other. Because I know some of them will say it's a coincidence that you know, there's still no life in the universe, but the 2 planets coincidentally happen to be really close to each other in the same solar system. They'll either say that, or it'll be, oh, it's mechanical transfer. The chemicals were in the solar system and they were moved between one planet and the other. Well, there's no proof that can actually take place. And the thing is, if it can take place, then why couldn't it have gone much further anyway? And then they're essentially admitting that panspermia is true. So you got them either way. Yeah, I know some of them will just hang on to it. But the thing is, if the most sensible answer is simply that life is a very common emergent property of our universe, and it happens everywhere, we get it all the time. That, I think, is a far more sensible argument. And if that's the case, then we should expect to find life wherever we go. And again, watch my SETI video for more detail, please, because I don't want to repeat myself in every single video I do. Watch my SETI video. If life is found everywhere, then we should expect to find life, and we know that life, where it arrives, it evolves through natural selection, through mutation and all these other factors that Charles Darwin identified. We know it evolves, it changes, it adapts to its environment, maybe even on Venus, even somewhere where there's, you know, in the upper atmosphere of Venus. And we know that once it's there, it tends to hang on, and you can't really get rid of it because it's too tenacious. Life on Earth can be found from the deserts to the poles, from deep coal mines to the upper atmosphere. It's everywhere, the biosphere. The biosphere is the sphere of the Earth. Now we know it evolves into very complicated forms. Not everywhere, obviously. I mean, there's places on Earth where there's just simple life. There are places on Earth where the only humans are those who arrived in recent years, like on Antarctica and places like that. But if it does evolve into complex life, then why wouldn't it evolve into some kind of intelligent animal species? We also know that it's possible to navigate the voids of space in spacecraft. We've done it. If we can do it, others can. So then why shouldn't it be possible for them to come and visit us? In which case, why shouldn't it be possible for UFOs to be real? I think this revelation about Venus, I mean, it's not directly a ufological story, but it's going to have a massive knock-on effect on ufology and the way ufology is perceived. And this is why I brought it up in this and made it the theme of this particular segment in this series of UFO disclosure videos. Incidentally, someone posted something, some photographs, or an article by someone called Dr. Leonid Casanformalini. Dr. Leonid Casanformalini. He's one of the scientists who worked on the Venera project. Now, Venera 13, I think it landed, it was in the mid-1980s, took some of the most spectacular footage, videos and films of the landscape of Venus. And there was apparently some moving objects. Now this is on the surface of Venus, where it's like a furnace and it's acidic and it's enormous pressure. Yet there's like moving objects. Now, if you find life on the surface of Venus, you'll find it anywhere. You'll probably find it in black holes or in the heart of the sun. Arthur C. Clarke wrote a story about that, actually, about life in the heart of the sun. I don't know much about that, though. I don't know much about that. But anyway, I think this is a really, really fascinating development, what we see with this thing with Venus, and I've been covering it in detail. I've been talking a lot about it online, and I think it's going to make people look at UFOs in a new way. I really do. But anyway, what else has been going on in the world of disclosure? And now it's time for us to examine a little bit more of the exopolitical UFO disclosure news that's going on at the moment. The first story I want to cover is this one, which was posted to the PRG website, and it is a little article by Teresa Tyndall, who is the MUFON State Director for Maryland. And I read through it, and I must say it's really sad. It's very tragic and very upsetting, because she goes into her background about her parents and about how her grandparents and parents had all been interested in UFOs, and then she talks about reading the articles in the New York Times in December 2017 and being really astounded by them. And she decided that the United Nations was the best way of getting information out about UFOs, as many people do. Everyone from Sir Eric Gary onwards has believed in the United Nations. So she actually travelled to a United Nations conference in November 2018 in Bonn, Germany, and this is called the United Nations High-Level Forum for Outer Space Affairs, and it's shortened slightly and given the acronym UNOOSA, or UNOOSA, I suppose that's called. The UN tends to like these kinds of acronyms and these little things like UNESCO and UNICEF and things like that. So she went there, and there was all this talk about climate change now, and it really upset her. It really gave her a really horrible feeling. Here she is at the meeting in Bonn, just outside the conference centre, and she literally had to walk out the meeting at some time just because she was so upset about it, about how, ocean temperatures rising, greenhouse gases, the fact that melting polar ice and things like that. And it was it's an awful lot for people to take. It's very upsetting when people hear about this sort of thing. And as you know, I don't believe that it is what people are telling us it is. I know that the climate changes, but I don't believe it's caused by us emitting carbon dioxide. I've been into this many times, and I also believe it's quite possible that the warming of the climate could reverse. We could get cooling and things like that. And I'm very worried about how the threat of this phantom menace of anthropogenic global warming is going to be used, say, to create Agenda 21, Agenda 13, all these other horrific reforms of internationalism and authoritarianism. But that doesn't mean it's not scary. I mean, even when I read this sort of stuff, it scares me, and I know it's not true. But for poor Teresa, she says, I was heartbroken. I felt betrayed. She said she looked out at the River Rhine, and she said, yeah, it's like I felt very shocked, overwhelmed, full of grief. Here I was expecting a huge uplifting announcement. All I got was a coming environmental apocalypse, she said. And she looked out the River Rhine. In November, in this time in Germany, they were experiencing a drought, and the River Rhine, which runs through Bonn, I've actually been there myself, it's a very nice spot, was lower than normal because of this drought. It was causing lack of rain. However, I do share. She does mention other things such as the plastic litter in the oceans, which is a real environmental threat. It really is. And luckily, there's a young Dutch guy now who is working on finding a solution to it. To that. So regardless of our different beliefs about climate change, I understand exactly where she's coming from here, and what she says, her idea for a solution is the same for mine. She says here, this apocalyptic vision made me think about my own UFO sightings, and then it all clicked for me. I know there's something flying in our skies that's obviously not fossil fuel based. The Navy has openly documented the existence of crafts with abilities that exceed what is currently accepted as the norm. The five observables: anti-gravity lift, sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures, low observability, cloaking, and transmedium travel. All of these observables seem to indicate that what the Navy has encountered, what many of us have witnessed, is not fossil fuel based and displays extraordinary capabilities. I know that it has been real for a very long time, and now we have the US Navy admitting to it, documenting it, and releasing it to the public. The United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs has set the goal of space technology to benefit all of humanity. This is and she gives a link here, and she goes into this UNUSA organization and how it plans to use space research to develop sustainable technology. And then what Teresa says at the end is probably, I don't know how much the UN agree with her on this, but I know that Eric Gary was very persuasive with them as Prime Minister of Grenada. But Teresa says this: I believe that the craft I saw, that generations of my family have seen, and what the US Navy has openly documented, may be part of the answer to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Obviously, the five observables seem to indicate that whatever this technology is not fossil fuel based. I don't know who has the technology. I don't know where it comes from or why. What I do know is, however, is that millions and millions of other people, including trained military pilots, police, elected officials, my family, and myself, have all seen and documented a seemingly exotic energy technology, not just in or around the United States, but around the world. The US Navy and now US senators and the public know that there's an alternative energy solution somewhere, and someone is already using it. We must answer these basic questions for multiple reasons. What is this technology? What can we do to bring this technology to market for the benefit of humanity? What are the applications of this technology? The bottom line, in my opinion, is this: the technology is there. It doesn't matter where it's coming from or who's behind it, but we desperately need it now. And she's absolutely right. This is something that many traditional environmentalists don't even entertain, these particular ideas. And Teresa does, and she's correct. We are facing an environmental crisis, regardless of your opinions on CO2. There's terrible damage being done to the Earth as a result of human activity, which could be averted if we had the technology to declassify it, which allows us to avert it. We're being forced essentially to use fossil fuels and other destructive methods to fuel our civilization, this old Stone Age technology, because of this truth embargo, because of the fact that we have technology kept from us. And I really I share Teresa's wish that this truth embargo comes to the end. We have a disclosure, because this is one of the most important aspects of the disclosure process and the implications of disclosure. Energy, free energy, cheap, limitless, environmentally friendly. Let's do it, guys. Let's have this now, before it's too late and before the world is destroyed. Now, there is only one other news story to cover in terms of exopolitical news, because obviously the coronavirus has shut everything down. I mean, all the conferences have been cancelled, things like that. Oh, this year is pretty much a write-off in terms of activism, in really sadly. However, what Steve Bassett has done here, he has reviewed the second series of the TV series that's Unidentified inside America's UFO investigation. I've seen the first series of this. I've not seen the second one yet. But it's you see, the Paradigm Research Group, that's Steve and all his colleagues, they supported the To the Stars Academy and for everything they've done. I've discussed this with Steve before, and all the other things, which the work by Senator Harry Reid, Louis Elizondo, all the other people involved in that on the board and things like that. Now, Steve, I mean, I don't know, I've not actually seen the episode, but Steve takes a pretty dim view of the second series in some ways, and that is related to the threat, what's called the threat. And of course, ATIP stands for Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. The threat identification, I mean, in military parlance, threat identification means just finding something and seeing whether it is a threat or not. It could be anything, really. So threat doesn't mean something you're going to shoot. It just means something you don't know yet whether it's friendly or not. Now, Steve says there's a distinct difference between threat and potential threat, and the TV series doesn't really recognise it. And he notes that potential threat was never used, was hardly ever used in the entire series. And he said that the 6th episode of Unidentified was flawed to the point of being grotesque. He says every aspect, I'm not going to imitate Steve's voice, but every aspect of the production was designed to be dark, including the cinematography, editing and content, which was drenched in threat projection. And they bring up the Connecticut Coronia incident. Now, this is something I looked into. There's been several occasions in this particular town called Connecticut Coronia, which is beside a lake in Italy. And what they've been reporting is that UFOs have been coming out of the lake and shooting, shooting their ray guns at the various houses and starting fires. And they say there's an underwater base at this lake. I think it's either the lake or the sea, where there's an underwater base where there are alien vehicles coming out and starting fires in the town. Now, this was reported in the episode 6, this episode 6 revelation. They reported on this and just said, oh, it's they took it as read. They kind of just took it as read. Now, what happened is, though, before this was made, there has been a criminal prosecution in which there has been several people have been prosecuted for arson, and they say the motive is probably an insurance scam. So if that's the case, then they made up the story about aliens. I'm not sure why they would do why they'd use that as if it's more something more something more credible. I'd probably come up with something more credible. Oh, it's aliens. You know, that's kind of asking for it if you set fire to your house for an insurance scam and blame it on the aliens. But I don't know. Maybe some people do that. At any rate, Steve said that the makers of this particular documentary could have researched that and they didn't. And so Steve wasn't impressed with the second season of this particular series for that reason. Now, it is actually very important that this is presented in the right way. And Steve claims that basically the series producers, the TTSA, Luis Elizondo, it's possible they are being used and exploited as part of some kind of scam to justify funding for the Space Force. The one that has been warned, the agenda that's been warned about by Carol Rosin in 2001 and many others. Werner von Braun did in the 70s and things like that. It is a serious matter actually, because of course the aliens could be hostile. It's true, and indeed there is some evidence to suggest that some are, but luckily they appear to be a very small minority. It appears that the majority of extraterrestrials that are interacting with the human race, this extraterrestrial intelligence that the truth embargo covers and Steve wants ended, appear to be observing us neutrally. And I would say that is the aggregate kind of motive or agenda that they seem to have, is detached observance. It's like we're being looked at from outside and studied. There doesn't seem to be much hostile intent from most aliens. However, it's possible the government will say that they're a threat for various reasons that I've discussed before. This is the fake alien invasion scenario. One of those, of course, is if you do want to create a space force and you do want to have military domination of space in the pre-disclosure or the post-disclosure world, then yeah, I mean, telling everyone there are bad, evil aliens out there is a way to do it. Maybe making films like Independence Day to kind of acclimatise them, as it's been said, to create some kind of cultural immunity or cultural manipulation, so you'll respond in a certain way if this revelation is actually made. It's intriguing that could be the case. Because if we are told there are hostile aliens, a lot of people would simply believe it. And who knows? I mean, you could just imagine the scenario where the President of the United States or some other world leader steps up and says, "We need to." I'm not going to imitate Trump's voice because I'll tell you, it won't be Donald Trump as president if this happens. It'll be someone else. We need to unite under a global flag temporarily as a state of emergency to save our planet. I mean, the film in Independence Day does that very interesting shot of the Israeli and Iraqi jets taking off together on the runway. Former enemies united to protect the world against the threat from abroad. And what was it Ronald Reagan said? Think how quickly our worldly differences would fall aside if we were faced by a threat from beyond our world. But of course, once those worldly differences have fallen aside and we are all united, we can stay united under a single global flag. A one world government, a dictatorial world government. One intended never to go away and never to ease up when the threat is removed, because the threat will continue. I mean, you could talk about evil aliens till the cows come home. Because if, like you say, well, the Pleiadians are evil, we got rid of them. Okay, now it's the Andromedans, we got rid of them. Alright, now it's the Orions or whatever, then we got rid of them. There's an infinite supply of potential boogeymen out there. There are a billion Bin Ladens in a billion galaxies. So it's very important that if ever any government turns to us and says there are evil aliens out there, aliens are real, but they're evil, we have to do something about it. We should take a step back, take a moment of pause and look at it again, as David Icke says. Look, put it on the back burner, look at it again. It's very important to thought process that David Icke has. Another reason, of course, where certain people with inside the truth embargo will go along with it, it simply digs them out of a hole, doesn't it? This is the credibility problem, which is, oh, we lied to you for 70 years. Sorry. And see,
if they can't just say that. I mean, no spin doctor could possibly find the right words for them to convey this without them looking like, oh goodness me. It's a political suicide. It's a political impossibility to say these things. The political structures of our world don't have the abilities, the capabilities to absorb a revelation of that magnitude. There would be complete societal breakdown, I believe, if that happened. I mean, I think it would be temporary. It would be something we'd get over, but politicians don't like that sort of thing. However, if they say, yes, there are aliens out there, but we kept it from you because they're evil, and we've been working on classified programs to defend the Earth and protect you, everyone will say, okay, maybe we'll just have to forgive you and move forward together. I mean, Bryce Zabel actually said something like this in 2011. I did pull him up on it, actually. So, like I said, I've not seen this particular program that Steve is referring to. However, based on his assessment, and if indeed they are overemphasizing the possibility of evil aliens, then that is, I think, problematic. And so I think I go along with what Steve says on this.
So what's next for UFO Disclosure 2020? I don't know, but 2020 is now, we're now 7 months into it, September, and you know what, I'll be glad when this year is over, and I will hope that next year's better. Certainly, I've only been to one conference, which is the one in Hull, the RawCon Research and Witness Convention, which of course I've done a video of, which you'll be able to find and watch. That's the only conference I've been to. I found out a couple of days ago the Lapis conference in next month in October has been cancelled. I think this year's basically, it's something we're going to have to write off and just put aside. Hopefully 2021 will be better. But of course, this year is far from over in terms of the drama going on in the world. We are approaching an incident which I'm going to make at least one, probably many other more videos on, and that is the US presidential election, where the incumbent Donald Trump is going to try and hang on to the White House. And, well, he's going to have a tough job. The forces of the establishment are working against him. They're desperate to get him out by any means necessary, fair or foul, and they will be foul because they can't get him out fairly. I'll say more about that in the videos on the particular subject, but there's going to be, you can see these forces are basically on a collision course for November, and there's going to, but God knows what's going to happen. Some people are suggesting that the United States itself might not even survive as a nation, this turmoil that is heading our way. I don't know, but I know that if Trump could be the disclosure president, as I've said many times, you know, people like Steve Bassett, they wrote Trump off as soon as he arrived. Grant Cameron, they just went into a blue funk and they just said, oh, when Trump won. Bassett was always going on, wasn't he, Steve? I mean, I love Steve, he's a great guy, but he was going on, Hillary Clinton's this, she's the disclosure president. Hillary Clinton will be the disclosure president. Do you remember that? And of course, she's not the president, it's Trump instead. And Steve just basically, I mean, for a few months he admitted himself, he just went into a complete pit of despair. And I said to him, and I said, look, I made a video called What About Trump? I made a video called that. UFO Disclosure 2016, What About Trump? I said. Well, I took a completely opposite view. I said that President Trump, being the president and not Clinton, made the possibility of UFO disclosure far more likely, not less. But Steve and Grant Cameron, as much as I admire those guys and respect them, they didn't see things my way, and I still disagree with them, and they still disagree with me. What I would suggest to President Trump, and in fact I'm going to write another open letter to him at some point before November, which I will make a video about, that if he wants to if he really wants to continue with the mission he set himself, which I talk about in my QAnon videos and things like that, then disclosure with a capital D would be the best thing ever. It would be absolutely guarantee him re-election and staying in the White House. Not only that, it would make him the greatest US president that nation has ever seen, and I think he's already that, even without disclosure. But being the disclosure president would put the cherry on the absolute cake. It really would. So who knows what could happen between now and November, but you know, I'm sure I'll be making another video in this series, as well as I'll be covering the US presidential election in enormous detail. I'll be doing live streams, I'll be doing Hapanmo radio shows, Hapanmo voice articles, portals, things like that. I am on the case with this, I really am. Anything that happens, you may hear it first in the New York Times. It seems to be the chosen outlet for this sort of stuff. But you will hear it second, exclusively, on Hapanmo TV. And thank you very much for watching once again, Hapanmo TV. Hospital Porters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.